Hi, I'm Eric Gadby, and I have been an enthusiast for all things nautical and aerospace since the age of 10. I served for 22 years in the U.S. Submarine Force and have been supporting it for the last 15 years since retiring. Join me as I pursue my passion for first-person context for ships, aircraft, and historic sites that have shaped our world, as well as some that are off the beaten path. Welcome to Roy, Utah, just north of Salt Lake City and home to Hill Air Force Base and the Hill Aerospace Museum. This is part one of a personally guided tour of the museum with Lieutenant Colonel Mark Hasara, U.S. Air Force retired, callsign Sluggo. Mark is a former KC-135 pilot, the author of the best-selling book Tanker Pilot, Lessons from the Cockpit, public speaker, host of the Lessons from the Cockpit show on YouTube, and is a small business owner of Wall Pilot, custom aviation graphics. In addition to all of these, Mark is a great friend and mentor.
Hey folks, my name is Mark Hasara, callsign Sluggo, KC-135 guy like you see on the hat. Eric and I have known each other for several years now, and he's here in Utah, and we are walking around the Hill Air Force Base, actually the Hill Aerospace Museum next to Hill Air Force Base, which is a fabulous museum. If you are ever in Utah, you have to carve out some time to come here to the Hill Aerospace Museum. This is the new gallery that they have created, and what's really cool is it's all paid off. The state helped pay for it. They moved a lot of their airplanes from outside inside, and today what Eric and I are going to do is walk around and talk about some of the airplanes. Now, the one behind me is the F-117 Nighthawk. And let me tell you the story of the first time I refueled one of these. It was during Desert Shield. It was November of 1990. And I had just been read into the program. The refueling nickname of the refueling program was called Busy Spartan. And we sat down at this desk and they said, you got to sign this paperwork. I see Busy Spartan. I'm like, what is this? And he says, you're going to refuel the F-117, because my co-pilot and my navigator had been in the program before they had come to Kadena. We took off and we were leading a 3-ship of KC-135A models with the old engines. Middle of the night, went down to a place called Khamis Mashat, which is a town in southwestern Saudi Arabia. I was flying with a major by the name of John Smallwood, who had been at Pease Air Force Base with me before it closed. I'm sitting in the jump seat and he reaches around, he taps me on the knee and he just goes like this. And I look outside and I'm like going, oh my gosh. And there, right outside our window, was an F-117. And it was about a 3/4 moon that night, and the moon was behind the airplane. So I could see the silhouette of the pilot moving around, his oxygen hose moving and everything, as he was playing with stuff in the cockpit, waiting his turn to get on. It was absolutely surreal. Or so I thought. John Smallwood says, go to the back, Mark, and watch it from the back. Both of them left, but 35 minutes later they came back and I was in the boom pod. And all I see is a red and green flashing light coming up at me like this. And the boom operator, my boom operator, which was getting checked out, was now in the couch getting ready to refuel this thing. On the KC-135, we have a floodlight on the top of the tail that sticks out backwards out the back of the tail. When the F-117 came up into the floodlight, it was like the Klingon bird of prey uncloaking and showing itself. And my boom operator is going, this is the cat's ass! This is the cat's ass! As it comes up closer, obviously it's getting ready to refuel. The refueling receptacle on the F-117 in the spine rolls over. And when that thing rolled over, Mike Dinsmore and I were both going over the intercom. This is the cat's ass. This is the cat's ass. And we just watched these two arrowhead black shapes at 2 o'clock in the morning getting gas. They took about 8,000 pounds, and this was what they call a post-strike refueling. And what they were doing is they were practicing for going to Baghdad during Operation Desert Storm. The tankers would drop them off in 2 air refueling areas called Peach and Nighthawk that came up from southern Saudi Arabia, and then they turned, and there was an orbit along the border in Saudi Arabia directly south of Baghdad. And the airplanes would just kind of peel off and go do their thing. And it took 35 minutes for them to go and come back. That's why they'd go and come back every 35 minutes. That's my story of the F-117s. Oh, they're all named after storms, lightning, thunder, and things like that.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Hi there. How you doing?
It's the next generation.
Next generation. You gonna fly one of these? Well, you can't fly one of these because there's only like 5 of them flying now.
Yeah, the only other one I've seen in person was at Dayton.
Yeah. Yeah. And this cockpit was seriously kind of just put together. It's pieces from all kinds of different airplanes. It's got F-18 multifunction displays. The HUD, I think, is from another airplane. It's really weird. Hey, for all your listeners, the reason that you see the chromate here and the edges all gone is because that was the classified part of the airplane.
Yep.
All right. And
radar.
of course the skin of the airplane was too. This one's all painted black. It doesn't have the radar absorbent RAM material on it because it's classified. It's classified.
Submarine Force, we have similar stuff on some of our masts and antennas.
Yeah. And see, this is one I refueled. This is one that I refueled during Midnight Rider.
Nice personal connection to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've refueled this one during Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
And it's work in progress. The staff is working to get it.
Yeah, they're putting it all together. They're actually making the leading edges out of some other tin or something like that.
I saw them nose fitting the ones this last week.
Yeah. So here's another Desert Storm story. Hang on when these guys get out. Okay, this is a Firebee drone. In the run-up to the war of Desert Storm, we were using this drone to stimulate the Iraqi air defenses, okay? And they had a program, it was called Scathe Mean, where they would launch these things and basically send them across the border and stimulate all of the radars and everything to see where the radars were. And what we were doing is called intrusive intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And what we're doing is we're intruding into their airspace and we're trying to find where all of the surface to air missile sites, where are the radars, but more importantly, who's talking to who, where's the critical nodes. Again, we call that portion of it critical node analysis. So we find out who is talking to who and who's making the decisions, because whoever is making the decisions and the building that they're in, that becomes a primary target for the F-117. And in fact, the very first targets that we hit the opening night of Desert Storm, the F-117s were the first ones to go in, along with the Tomahawk land attack missiles, which we'll show you those here in just a little while. Would get serviced, and that's what we called it, serviced by an F-117 with their 2,000-pound GBU-27 bunker buster bombs. But this drone you see behind me was very instrumental in finding out where those SAM sites were. And then on the opening night of the war, a lot of these were fired into downtown Baghdad, again, to stimulate the SAM sites. All the SAM sites came up, and the F-4G Wild Weasels and the Navy's A-7s, I think they fired 114 harm missiles all within the space of about 2 or 3 minutes that go up to 40,000 feet, wait for the radars to come up, and then they go down and destroy them. And we almost completely wiped out the integrated air defense of Baghdad in the first 2 nights of the war.
I've seen what happened to using some of those bunker busters at Al-Assad inside the hangars.
Yeah.
You go inside, there's just a hole in the roof, and on the inside is blast damage from.
Yeah, and you know what, Eric? There's a really famous report that was done after the war, and that report was kind of like our site exploitation report. And they went to some of these bunkers in Kuwait, and what they would find is the bombs, they would drop 2 at a time. One would punch a hole, and then the other one would kind of come through the hole and blow up whatever was inside. And in one instance, in one of these hardened aircraft shelters, the 2 bombs had come through and had landed like on the left side inside the bunker. But what it had done is it had slapped the MiG up against the wall like a fly with a swatter. And literally the thing was pasted like this against the wall inside the hardened aircraft shelter.
At the Marines that I was stationed with, they operated the Scan Eagles, obviously the small ones.
Yeah. Okay.
It has changed warfare.
Yeah, this has, okay. And last week I interviewed a Reaper pilot on my Lessons from the Cockpit show. Now, let me tell you about these. On the opening of the Shock and Awe campaign in March of 2003, we were trying to do the same exact thing like we did with the Firebee drone. We're going to stimulate the Baghdad defenses. We took 2 RQ-1 Predators that had gone beyond their service life. We filled them to the gills with gas, took all the classified stuff off, but kept all of the data link and the cameras on it, and we sent them over the top of Baghdad. We had one east near Tharthar Lake and one west of the Euphrates River. And because they were in basically trying to stimulate the air defenses and being there, we nicknamed them call signs Chum 1 and Chum 2.
Oh, that's
all
cute.
right. Well, the crazy thing that happened was Chum 1 and Chum 2 did not get shot down. They stayed up for almost, I think, 28 hours, maybe a little more. I can't remember exactly, but it was like 28 to 30 hours. And they were sending beautiful pictures from downtown Baghdad. So what we did was, since they weren't getting hit, we sent them to all the real high value targets to actually record what was happening on the buildings and other targets that were downtown Baghdad, that the F-117s were striking, that the cruise missiles were striking. And then, by day 2, we had non-stealthy airplanes like F-14s and things like that going into downtown Baghdad. So what happened to them? Well, Chum 1, let's start with Chum 2. Chum 2, which was east of the Euphrates between Tharthar Lake and the Euphrates, we took that one and it was about to run out of gas. And so we just took it and dumped it in Tharthar Lake. And it did a very nice soft landing and got waterlogged and everything went blank. A couple of days later, a bunch of people were dancing on the top of this Predator drone near a lake. And all the Predator guys are like, wait a minute, what's going on here? We haven't lost one. And one of the Predator guys saw on the tail the serial number of it and said, wait a minute, that's Chum 2. It had actually floated ashore, okay, on Tharthar Lake, and a bunch of people found it, and they're all dancing on the wings, oh, we shot down the Predator and everything. They hadn't shot it down. Now, Chum 1. We wanted to see what would happen in Baghdad if one of our pilots went down. Who would be talking to who, and how would they go and capture one of our pilots, assuming they got shot down as the war progressed toward Baghdad. So we took Chum 1 and literally near his palace went right into the Euphrates River. All of the news folks, CNN, Al Arabia, everything, we're like going, there's a pilot down in Baghdad. They're all running up and down. They're shooting into the bulrushes, and people are, I hear something, there he is, everything. Okay. They were looking for the pilot of an unmanned Reaper, Predator, Chum 1. But we were able to get really good intelligence from that kerplunk into the Euphrates to find out who was talking to who, how they would respond, and all that kind of stuff. Command and control, all those kinds of things, okay? And that's the story of Chum 1 and Chum 2.
I didn't get a chance to see Tharthar Lake, but I've been all around it.
Have you?
Yep. So
all these people are dancing up and down on the wings and everything.
Yeah, I was with the Marine Battalion or Squadron.
Yeah.
That was aviation ground support. I was their electronic warfare.
Yeah. See, I don't know a lot about these airplanes. These were well before my time. C-119 Boxcar. This was a Korean War airplane that did everything from moving cargo to dropping troops. And I'm talking a lot of troops, a lot of troops.
Yeah, they have one at the Air Museum at Lewis McChord.
Yeah. Yeah. This is an old Lockheed JetStar. This is an old Lockheed. This was an executive jet that the Air Force bought, and they put it in the 89th. As you can see, it's kind of in the paint scheme of like Air Force One. And what they did was, senators or congressmen needed to move somewhere, this airplane would do it. Now, it doesn't have the range like the Gulfstreams do, but...
Yeah, for the period, though, it was actually pretty impressive in performance.
Yeah, this was. And this is the kind of executive jet that, CEOs were buying at the time. I'm talking the 60s and 70s.
Or what was it? Which one of the James Bond movies was it?
Oh yeah, that's right. There's one in there.
Yeah, that was
I forgot which
Goldfinger.
One. Yeah, that's right. Goldfinger. They have one of these in it. Okay. See, look, they got the landing light here in the nose. All right. Now, as crazy as this sounds, I've actually flown in one of these. Just 2 years ago, a couple years ago.
Did you go up to Canada?
No. The Berlin Historical Foundation, okay? Berlin Airlift Historical Foundation, BAHF, has one of these that's still flyable. And what they do is they go all over the United States and in Europe, and they recreate the Berlin airlift and the Gale Halvorsen candy drop. The pilot, his name is Tim Chope, and he flies one that's all painted up in the Berlin airlift markings. And they have this big slot in the back of the door that they actually drop candy out, just like they did with Gale Halvorsen. So Colonel Halvorsen died a couple years ago, just after his 100th birthday, if I remember right. And they did a huge kind of a memorial to Gale Halvorsen. And the Berlin Airlift Historical Foundation, C-54, actually came out to Spanish Fork Airport, and they had it open for people to go through at Provo Airport And Provo was just about to open its brand new hangar, or excuse me, terminal. And so they parked a C-17 next to it with the C-54. They renamed the C-17 Spirit of the Candy Bomber, all right? During a ceremony where the 4-star general of AMC, Mike Minahan, came out and did the ceremony. And they had to reposition it from Provo Airport down to Spanish Fork. Tim Chope invited my wife and I to come up and go on the airplane for 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Which, of course, we just had a ball, right? But something happened while we were doing this, all right? And my wife knows whenever you have pilots looking out a window, something's wrong. And she reached over and she goes, something's wrong, because two of the maintainers were looking out the window. And what had happened is when they put the gear down, the left gear didn't come down, right? And they just recycled the gear and then it came down, okay? And they had to grease a spring and a lock. And that was the reason it didn't come down. But it was just funny because we're flying around and my wife has been on a KC-135 that had an engine failure. We were together on an airliner that had an engine failure. And then this landing gear problem. She says, I'm never flying with you again, brother. Never, ever am I flying with you again.
I think Buffalo Air up in Canada, they still have a couple of DC-6s.
Yeah, there's a couple up in Alaska that are still, I think, still flying too. So, anyway. How you guys doing?
Good, you? Do you want us out of your photo?
Huh?
Oh, you're,
Duck down.
you're fine.
No, it's all right. Up and fly with us. You and Val come up and fly. And they were just going from Provo to Spanish Fork. But of course, you know, he's going to fly around a little bit, you know. And he was about 1,200 feet, 1,500 feet flying around. And the really odd thing about the airplane is it makes a lot of noise inside when you're taxiing. And there's all kinds of really weird squeaky noises when it's taxiing. And what I found out was it's the hydraulic pumps.
Ah.
You can hear the hydraulic pumps, okay? If you ever go on an Airbus airplane,
the dog barking.
Yeah, like a A320 or something like that. That's the sound it makes, okay? Pretty close.
Yeah.
All right. And this was doing the same thing, okay? And of course, my wife leaned over and goes, why is it so noisy? What is that sound, you know? Because she doesn't like flying with me. All right. She and I have been on 3 airplanes that have had an engine failure, an engine come apart, and then we were flying on the C-54 when it was depositioning and the left landing gear didn't come down. And like I said, she knows when she sees pilots and maintainers looking out a window, there's something wrong. And of course, I was trying to hide the fact that, okay, there's something wrong, and failed miserably because there's 2 people going out the window, you know, there's something wrong. And then, you know, I heard them say, hey, the left gear main didn't come down. And they just recycled the gear and the gear handle, bring it up, okay, 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4, 5 potato, 6 potato, 7 potato more, and then put it back down, and it came back down, right? And what it was the uplock. There's springs and everything that they just had to grease and didn't have another problem with it. But Tim Chope, and Scott is the other pilot. He's a Coast Guardsman. They are so good at dropping the candy bars. It was fairly windy that day. And he knew exactly how to offset himself when they dropped these candy bars, that they literally floated down on top of the crowd. All right. And all the kids saw all these 300 parachutes, 298, coming down, okay? And we're all jumping for it. And like I said, it was something that these kids and their parents probably had never seen before, you know, an event like that. Recreating Gail Halverson's famous candy bomber drops in the Berlin airlift. And you have to think about this, folks. 1948, this was the first Cold War conflict. And I say conflict, even though we weren't firing bullets at each other, but it was still the very first Cold War conflict after the Russians and the Americans and the French, the British, had ended World War II. This was the very first conflict between communism and, I'll say, democracy, was the Berlin airlift.
Yep, they tried to starve them out, and
yeah, they tried to starve them out and couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Okay, now here's the crazy thing. If I remember right, I'm gonna have to look this up. You're gonna have to, and you're gonna have to look this up. But the amount of, it was called Operation Vittles, all right? And his candy drops were called Operation Little Vittles, all right? If I remember right, somebody said this at the thing. It went on for almost, I think about a year, a little over a year. And they brought tons and tons of milk and beans and all kinds of stuff.
Coal, you name it.
And to give you a comparison, I think somebody told me that you can do the whole Berlin airlift in, I think, 9 C5 missions. I think is what it was. We got to look that up. Okay,
Yeah, we'll have to look that one up.
Look that
see
up.
how many
But
tons.
it's crazy now because of the size of the C5s and everything. But the Berlin airlift could have been done like in I think it was 9 C5 missions or something like crazy. All right. And you have to remember, folks, if you ever go to an air show and walk inside of a C5, I want you to remember this. The C5's cargo area from the nose to the tail is longer than the first flight of the Wright brothers in the Wright Flyer.
It is. I've walked those steps out at Kitty Hawk.
Yeah, is longer than the Wright brothers' first flight.
Yeah, the first powered flight.
And the wingspan of the B-36 bomber, the big bomber that flew in the 40s, 50s, is also longer than I think three of the four flights that they made that day. Yeah, yeah. Crazy odd things.
Anytime I think of the B-36, it's Jimmy Doolittle and Strategic Air Command.
Yeah. Jimmy Stewart and God, what was her name? I can't remember her name now. Anyway, I can picture her face. Now, here's the crazy thing about this airplane. I went to Oshkosh. Or no, excuse me. I went to the Reno Air Races, and this guy was selling his F-86. Guess how much he wanted for it? $450K with another engine and 2 more tanks, okay? And I thought, man, because you would think, like $1 million, $1.5 million.
No.
And he was selling it for $450,000.
I like that L-39 Albatross that I went for a flight in the Czech Republic.
I know.
It's, $500K.
Exactly, okay? So this is named after, this is actually painted in the paint scheme of a Utah ace. His name was Jolly. Now, this thing had 4 650 caliber, 3 on each side. They had a version of it though that had 20 millimeter, all right? They did what they call ace vol test, all right? And they actually put 20 millimeter cannons on some of these things, tore the MiGs apart. But you have to remember, in the 1950s, the guys that are flying this are all World War II guys with lots of experience and lots of gunnery experience, okay? And that patch you see there, I believe he flew with the 335th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, which is the Chiefs. And the Chiefs are still in existence. They fly F-15E Strike Eagles at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base.
That's a beautiful airplane.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's why it has this Chief on it, because the 335th and the 4th fighter wing, and this is the stripes that you see, the yellow and black stripes, were the 4th fighter interceptor wing. And the 335th was the Chiefs, and that's why you see that marking on it.
I love these because, they got the leading edge slats on them and can really improve the performance.
Extremely maneuverable, yeah. Extremely maneuverable. So this is this is the F model with the slats on it. The MiG-15 was a really maneuverable airplane, but this thing could outperform it. So anyway. Another Cold War airplane, Scorpion. My father was a young draftsman and helped design the actuators on this airplane. Was walking around it and they were doing a gear swing on it, and they didn't have the red lights going, and my dad went by it, actually walked by the gear just as it swung up. And yeah. But the crazy thing about this airplane is it's got these rocket pods out here, and it carried missiles in it that they would shoot at airplanes from this one. Isn't that freaking crazy?
I know.
Unguided rockets, okay?
Throw enough lead at them.
Well, and you think about it now, okay? This thing is shooting unguided rockets at an airplane that's moving at like 400, 450 knots, all right? And now you have AIM-9X, which is seriously an imaging infrared missile. Not just a heat-seeking missile, but an imaging infrared missile that is so precise. And all of you have heard about the drones and cruise missiles that Iran has been firing, that the Houthis have been firing. Most of the air-to-air engagements and destruction have been by AIM-9X. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I did
Yeah,
not.
most of it has been by AIM-9X. And here's the thing about AIM-9X. My last job in the Air Force was testing joint weapons, JDAMs, and one of my programs was AIM-9X.
AIM-9X, yeah.
And I actually got to go to Oceana Naval Air Station, fly in a Super Hornet simulator, and shoot the first block of them, okay? And there was just no getting away from it. It was crazy. Let's look at this one here. This one is very historical, particularly to a refueling pilot. See these doors right here? This was the first airplane that was built with air refueling receptacle.
Oh.
Those are the doors for the air refueling receptacle, all right? This was the first fighter jet that was built with air refueling in mind. And you see these doors here. Now, most of the airplanes now have it in the spine. Or somewhere, unless the Navy with the probe. But this was where the air refueling receptacle was built into the F-84. And
The old KC-97s?
no, B-29s.
B-29s?
B-29s, yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about that just real quick, okay? The first combat refuelings were actually during the Korean War. In June of 1951, I think. And they had just brought over KB-29s that had just been fitted with the brand new patented air refueling system from a company called FRL, okay? Flight Refueling Limited, and Sir Alan Cobham. Sir Alan Cobham had actually patented the very first refueling system in 1934 and created flight refueling, I think in 1937. And what it was a hose system. And that hose system was, the hose was dangled behind the airplane. You actually had something that would grab it. And you'd reel it in and make the connection that way. That took too long. They figured out that, hey, if we put this cone on the back and just keep the cone dangling behind there, and we put a probe that will fit in there like a hummingbird, then we can refuel that way. And that's the system that they were using, Eric, during the Korean War.
The Russians still use it for their everything.
Yeah, and a lot of international partners use it too, okay? So what they did is they had 3 RF-80, and we're gonna look at a F-80 here in just a second, reconnaissance airplanes that were gonna go up and take pictures but they only had a really short range. I think it was only like 350 miles. It wasn't very far. So what they did is they took one of these B-29s that had the baskets on it, the drogues on it. They put it off the coast of North Korea near a town called Wonsan.
Wonsan, yep.
Okay. The RF-80 went up there, and the probes were in the tip tanks, all right? And so what they would do is they'd fill one side up halfway, fill the other side up full, and then come back in and fill up the other one, and off they'd go. And that's how they did it. So these special tanks, again, with FRL's help, were put on the F-80 in order to be able to do this. Now, there were several other airplanes, like the F-84 that had tip tanks, had the same thing. Believe it or not, the F-86 that we just looked at had their probe in the drop tanks. And they would come up, they had a probe in the drop tanks, and they'd come up and refuel that way. So these 3 RF-80s now just basically, now they've got 350-mile range all over North Korea.
That's a good chunk of Korea.
All over North Korea. And they're able to go out and do that. So there's a lieutenant colonel by the name of Doris, who had the longest flight, 12 hours, okay, in one of these, F-84. Again, it was probe and drogue, all right? And what was really cool is they brought over some of these KB-29s with the baskets, and he refueled, I think, 6 times off of it, all right? So he drops his bomb on a target, refuels, fires his rockets on a target, refuels, shoots all of his ammo on something, refuels, and then he became like a forward air controller, all right? And I think the mission was like 12 hours long, which is a very long time to be sitting in that.
And before the advent of,
Yeah,
computer flight controls.
exactly, okay? Yeah, he's ham-fisting this thing, okay? So later in the war, the B-29s, they went to Boeing and says, hey, Curtis LeMay says, we can't do probe and drogue. We can't fill a B-40, it took 110 minutes to fill up a B-47. We need something faster. And that's when they came up with the boom. So you had KB-29P and KB-29M. And that's the origin of the radio call, are you a mama or a papa? All right?
Gotcha. That's
Because what the pilot was asking, are you boom or are you drogue? Okay?
Yeah.
The mamas were drogue, the papas were boom, if I remember right. All right? And that's how the pilots during the Korean War would make that radio call to find out if it was a boom or drogue equipped KB-29. All right?
And simple and elegant at the same time.
Simple and elegant at the same time. And the fascinating thing about this is there was a particular gentleman who was very involved with this, who said, I'm going to go over and find out about this. Very famous. And he went to FRL, and Cobham gave them all of their movies and pictures and everything of their system, all right? And this same very famous gentleman went back a second time with money. And they bought 29 of the drogue sets that they put on the KB-29s, all right? And that gentleman was Jimmy Doolittle, who was on the board of Shell Oil Company at the time.
Oh, wow.
And was their chief pilot, all right? And General Spots and a bunch of others came to him and said, hey, we need you to go figure this out. And of course, he went over there, and Jimmy Doolittle is one of the guys that got us introduced to air refueling. But the F-84 that you see here was the very first air refuelable fighter that was made with an air refueling system in it for boom. And that's what those doors are right there.
And we had discussed about how slow the probe and drogue system was and how that's an Achilles heel
Yeah.
with, the Russians with their intercontinental bombers.
Yeah.
That,
So our rule of thumb through the drogue, through the hose, is 1,000 pounds per minute, all right? A B-52 takes 80,000 pounds every time so think about that. 80 minutes. You just don't have that time.
No.
So our boom will pump 6,000 pounds a minute, but it still takes us about 22 minutes to fill the B-52 up, particularly when it's like 80,000 to 100,000. Now, I want to just show your folks real quick. Here's the F-84 with the wingtip pods. And so they had a probe that came out here and a probe that came out on this side, and that's how they refueled. They would just stick the probes in, like I said, half in one, full in one, then fill up the other half.
Trying to keep it as close to balance.
Yeah, and try and keep it as close to balance as they could.
Because that's a lot of mass on the wingtips.
Yeah, it is. And you have to remember, this thing's carrying bombs and guns, and later on rocket pods too. Rockets are just rockets on the wing. So this was a very important fighter during the Korean War. Now, if we come over here, here's an F-80. And I mentioned to you, they have a reconnaissance version of this, and that was the first combat refueling. The guns were replaced by cameras, 2 cameras here and 2 cameras on the other side, and another camera that looks straight down. So the RF-80 reconnaissance airplane was the first airplane to refuel. And again, you see the tanks out here on the wings. They had probes in them on both sides. And again, that's how they would do it. Fill one halfway, fill one up full, fill the other one full. And then, but they had terrible range. Terrible range. That was one of the first things about jets. The jets consumed a lot of gas. And a lot of people thought and felt very strongly that when we went into the jet age with the 707s and the DC-8s, that they would not be successful. They called it passenger revenue per mile or something like that. And of course, they had airplanes with reciprocating engines that were doing all the stuff, like the C-54 and Constellations and Lockheed Electras going turboprop. What they didn't realize is that the 707 was 5 times more the revenue.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they could go New York to London, and they could do it quickly.
And speed, yep.
Yeah, it was not only fuel efficiency, more fuel efficient, but the speed too, to go from LA to Los Angeles, or LA to New York to Paris. And that was the big deal. Can it go from LA to New York or New York to Paris? And of course, the 707s obviously could do well beyond that.
And, here we are, fast forward 50 odd years later, and it still takes the same amount of time to get from.
Yeah.
You can go further.
Unless you're flying an SR-71, or something fast, So, again, this one was used for, you see Air Training Command, it was used for navigator training, and that big black thing on the bottom was the radar that they used, ground mapping radar that they used to train navigators. This airplane was used to train navigators going into the Air Force. Now, this airplane over here, the Thunderstreak, I think the air refueling receptacle is on the top of the wing, if I remember right. Hang on, let me come down here and just take a quick look down the wing. Yeah, there it is. I don't know if you can hold it up high enough. See it right there? See it right there? See that thing popped up. It was in the wing, okay? That's the air refueling receptacle on this, okay? So, and again, this is the 50s and 60s. They're still trying to find out, where do we put the receptacle, okay?
Right.
We've got it in the wing root of the other airplane. We got it on the top of this one, all right? But finally they figured out, okay, we'll put it in the spine, right? The very first long-range refueling where they actually moved jets was actually that airplane, all right? And there's really good pictures of it too, being refueled by KB-29s. And believe it or not, the famous 56 Fighter Group commander, Dave Schilling, was the wing commander. And they were flying out of Savannah, Georgia. They were going from Savannah to North Korea, or to Korea, to fight. And it was the first time they moved a bunch of jets using air refueling.
En masse.
Yeah, en masse, okay. And so they took off from Savannah. They were fueled over Waco, Texas, landed in San Francisco Bay Area, okay, at like Travis Air Force Base, somewhere there. Then went to Hawaii. And for safety reasons, they had reporting stations across the ocean in case a guy had to jump out, all right? And then kind of island hop the rest of the way across, like, you know, Midway, you know, Wake, Guam, Okinawa, and then home, and then up to the Korean Peninsula. But yeah, Dave Schilling. One other thing about Dave Schilling. Dave Schilling was also the very first one to make the Atlantic crossing doing refueling. And he was refueling off of Lancaster bombers, which FRL had.
Oh, wow.
And then got picked up by KB-29s, I think, going across too, okay? He was flying as a two-ship, and they flew into Limestone, Maine, which is now became Loring Air Force Base. But his wingman bent the probe during a contact, okay? And flew a little bit farther and then had to jump out. Fortunately, he jumped out over land. And they went and picked him up, you know, a couple hours later. But he had to dump the jet because the probe broke. The probe went like this when he made a contact. And but Schilling made it all the way back to the States. That was the first transatlantic refueling movement. All right.
I had the chance to crawl inside the Lancaster at the RAF, or the Imperial War Museum at Duxbury.
Yeah. Oh, it's an amazing airplane.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And like I said, they made it into a big tanker. You know, FRL made it into a hose and drogue tanker. Now, this airplane, the B-26, actually flew during World War II, but this is actually configured as a night attack airplane for the Korean War. And this is a very famous squadron, Grim Reaper Squadron, that actually flew missions during the Korean War. And they flew what was called night reconnaissance and attack missions. And a lot of these airplanes ended up flying the same mission in the early part of the Vietnam War. And you can see all the rockets, you know, all the bombs on it. You know, those are 250-pound bombs. And of course, you've got 8 guns in the nose.
Yeah, it looks like a porcupine.
Yeah, you've got 8 guns in the nose too. Plus the weapons bay and the fuselage of the airplane. And this is kind of an unusual airplane because you actually enter the airplane through the nose wheel.
That was one of the things I noticed about the Russian bombers and everything. It was you go up through the nose gear.
Yeah. On their Su-34 fullback, it's you go up the landing gear, the nose gear. Isn't that crazy? You know, it's got this step right here and everything, but there's also a hatch in the nose wheel that you go up to. So, all right, let's go back and see the fun jets. Yeah, they destroyed a lot of rail cars and engines with these airplanes flying during the Korean War. Oh, and these things flew as fire bombers for a long time. You know,
yeah, they still have a lot of the old
Yeah.
S2 trackers and
Yeah, the S2 tracker. Yeah, that's right.
Thanks for sticking around to the end. I appreciate all of the views, your comments, likes, the returning subscribers, and especially when someone has a personal connection to the aircraft and leaves a comment about it. I'd like to also again thank Mark Hasara for his guiding us around the museum, and to the Hill Aerospace Museum for maintaining this collection with such great care.